Thanks so much for inviting me here to talk about my favorite topic. Um, First, I want to acknowledge that the work I'm going to be presenting here takes place on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'm very grateful that I get to live and work on these lands and recognize that the work that we do as water professionals is very important to addressing the environmental racism that these First Nations have and continue to experience. Um, the field of urban stormwater management has just changed drastically over the last 50 years. I love this figure. It comes from the Toronto's Low Impact Development Design Guide. And shows just how things have changed as we have a better understanding of the environment. The goals that us water professionals are trying to achieve has just grown over time. Going back from pre-1970s, it was just get the water off the property as quickly as possible. Then moving into the 1970s, more thought around floodplain management and flood management, seeing more dry detention basins. Then into the 1980s, more turn to focus on non-point source or urban pollution. We start seeing some of the big wet ponds to try to manage that pollution. And then to now, where we have this long list of things, in the 1990s, and realizing that the way we're going to address these is really recreating the natural hydrology. The way we do that is through more distributed stormwater management, doing more infiltration, sustainable urban drainage. So call it what you will. Back east, they call it low impact development. Around North America, they're calling it more commonly green infrastructure. I tell people I work with in green infrastructure, they think I'm installing solar panels. So to be more specific, we'll say green stormwater infrastructure or green rainwater infrastructure. Over in the UK, they call it sustainable urban drainage systems, which I love because it's very descriptive and it has that awesome acronym of SUDS. But I'll be calling it green infrastructure or GI throughout this presentation. I was very lucky to start my career at the beginning of this paradigm shift. And at the beginning, it was all about pilot projects. Pilot projects are great. They're easy to get approval for because they're non-committal, they're low risk, they're small scale. Usually, you can scrape together the funding from grants or leftover budget to get something installed, and you do a nice little thing for the environment, get a pat on the head. Vancouver, they love pilot projects, do pilot projects for everything. The joke is Vancouver has more pilots than Air Canada. But to really make a difference, you've got to install a bunch of these things. You've got to make it mainstream, make it business as usual. And when I came to Vancouver in 2017, that's really what my job has been all about, making it an actual full-fledged asset class at the city. So let me tell you a little bit about the Vancouver context. So it's a city surrounded by water. Historically, there's 40 historic streams. Today, there's only 2 streams that you could say are partially open. So very, very urbanized city. All those streams have now been buried. And like a lot of older cities, Vancouver has a combined sewer system. So for those of you who don't know what that is, instead of a separate sanitary and storm pipe, it's one combined pipe. Everything goes into that pipe. And when it's not raining, all of the dry weather flow goes to the wastewater treatment plant. And there are days when it doesn't rain in Vancouver. But then when it does rain, there's an overflow of combined stormwater and sanitary that go into your receiving water. English Bay, Georgia Strait, Fraser River. There's a lot of different ways cities are tackling their combined sewer systems. Most are not bothering to separate them. They're finding other strategies to eliminate those overflows. Vancouver is on the path to separating its sewers. We've been doing that since the 1970s. We're to a point where half the pipes have been separated. But essentially, because the trunks are still combined, all those separated pipes still go into a combined pipe. The whole system essentially functions as a combined system. So it's going to be, at least another 50 years until it's fully separated. Making one pipe, two pipes might sound simple, but when you consider the thousands and thousands of properties that also have combined pipes, it's, a very complicated process. Which takes me to why it's often really complicated for me to explain how green infrastructure is addressing water quality. When I've worked in those other combined sewer overflow communities, the goal is just to take water out of the pipes, keep the stormwater out of the pipes, and that translates into reduced overflow. When I worked in separated communities like in Mississauga, it's all been about cleaning the stormwater. But because we're in this transition right now, the green infrastructure, we're keeping volume out, which translates into less overflow. But then once the pipes are separated, that green infrastructure will be doing stormwater duty. This is one area that, coming to the city, I've actually had to do a lot of educating because there's been so focused on just separating the sewers. We just got to stop this horrible combined sewer overflow. But what's been found lost sight of is the hazards of stormwater. Stormwater is still toxic to the environment, and we don't want to trade just one problem for another. So really, the sediment load between the two are very similar, but with the sanitary and combined sewer overflow, it's higher in the organics and bacteria, while the stormwater is higher in metals and hydrocarbons. So for other drivers, so climate change, we're having wetter winters, more intense storms. We're addressing this in our future design, so we've updated our extreme storm design events and are upsizing our pipes for that. But we have all of this infrastructure built for those storms of yesteryear. So have summers with less rain. We're dealing with too little rain. So our urban forest canopy is suffering. And those rare rain events that we do get in the summer, it's bypassing the soils in the trees. It's being wasted down the gutter. So we're also doing green infrastructure to reduce urban heat island. And urban heat island has always been part of this long list of ancillary benefits. Really, we're doing green infrastructure for water quality and hydrology, but look at all these nice other things that it does. But this event in 2021, the urban heat dome, really changed that mindset. You could consider this one of the deadliest weather events in Canadian history. Just in Vancouver, 117 people died. Recommendations was, not just that cities need to redouble their efforts on urban canopy, but I was really appreciative that that report also emphasized the need for permeable surfaces. So, we're getting that water into the ground so that it's available to be evaporated to cool the environment and also access for the trees. Another driver is growth. We're densifying city, huge housing problem. We have all these single-family residential neighborhoods that are getting turned over to mid-rise, high-rise development, lots more impervious area. So we're using green infrastructure to also compensate for those impacts, so to service that growth. So then we've got this nice long list here of drivers for green infrastructure, why it makes good sense for the city. Climate change, water quality, ecosystem health, growth and utility servicing, equity and reconciliation. Basically, there's something for everyone there, whatever your perspective. So let me tell you a little more about the green infrastructure tools that we're using in Vancouver. So the tools that we're implementing now can be split into these four main categories here. And so from we have the bioretention, the subsurface infiltration systems, permeable pavements, and rainwater tree trenches. We have about 400 of these assets in the city. As we grow and implement more and densify, I think the mix of these is going to change over time. I'm going to talk about each of these a little bit more individually. So bioretention, rain gardens. This is my favorite. It's everybody's favorite, green infrastructure tool to talk about, and we use it a lot. I think it's what comes to mind for most people when we talk about, wanting to implement more green infrastructure in the city. Although sometimes I think it's to our detriment because it can give people alarm bells saying, okay, you want to put these landscapes on every single street in the city. It's going to be take up so much space, be such a maintenance nightmare. But what we really try to emphasize here is that we're not necessarily going to try to create more landscape spaces, but making them more multifunctional. And these corner bulges here are a good example. So the city has been doing these for 30 or more years now to make intersections more safe. So these bulges at the corner that reduce the crossing distance, slow down traffic. The way they're designed, they always have this additional landscape boulevard space associated with them. So now we redesigned them so that that landscape space is also providing stormwater treatment and infiltration. So this is a very standardized approach we're taking. We have 100 of these, and growing in the city right now. And in contrast, though, we're also have some larger installations of these bioretention landscapes. We call them our placemaking type projects. So these might be like a plaza space that has a large landscape component to it. There's also segments in the city of streets that are being closed down to traffic and turned over to active transportation and to green space. So this is where we can do some of these larger bioswales. And what we're able to do there is take runoff not just from that one local street, but we're also taking runoff from larger drainage area. And then these are also good opportunities for us to educate the public on green infrastructure. And then the next group here, the infiltration trenches and chambers, basically just creating storage underground where we can hold the water so that it can infiltrate. Very simple, but some important aspects to this. One, we're trying to improve the pretreatment, and it'll depend on the land use and what's draining to it. If it's a residential street, we might have just a catch basin that drains to the system. It'll have a sump that provides some treatment, but we're also adding these inserts to enhance that treatment. Or if it's a higher loading situation, we might actually have like a proprietary treatment manhole that, like a hydrodynamic separator that will capture more, do more pretreatment work. And then the other aspect that's extremely important is these cleanouts and access and monitoring wells. We had a few of these systems that we inherited, legacy ones that didn't include these cleanouts. We've gone into them, we've tried to see how we can restore them and make them more functional, but there's just not the access, and we basically had to retire those. And then the permeable pavements, we've got all the different types. There's the porous asphalt, pervious concrete, permeable pavers, even this newer type that's this gravel that's mixed with a polymer. I mean, to be honest with you, there's not one that makes our pavement asset managers perfectly happy. Can't get necessarily the smoothest, the exact way they want, or the durability or loading to the extent that they want. But it's something that we're working closer to. We're about to test out a new porous asphalt mix this year. Okay, and then the fourth category here, this is one that I'm particularly excited about because it works well in our densifying areas of the city, are these rainwater tree trenches. So the way these work, since the 1990s, there's been a lot of effort to get street trees more soil volume, beyond that little tree pit cutout, where they can get access to air, water, loose soil under pavements. And there's two ways to do this. One is with soil cells, these like plastic crate-like type things that hold up the pavement, or there's structural soil, which is large rocks that's filled with loose soil. So that's been done for a long time, but more in the last 10 years is adding the stormwater component to it. So using these volumes to also filter and infiltrate stormwater. So that's what that figure is showing here. So we see a lot of potential for this in Vancouver. I think so much so we engaged UBC, a researcher, Osvaldo Vega, to do this literature review for us, on the technology. Basically, we found that the performance is similar to bioretention. It's basically like an underground bioretention system. I'm going to be mentioning a whole bunch of resources throughout this presentation. I do have a list of them on my final slide, so you don't have to rush to jot them down. On the break, maybe you can take a picture of the slide or something, so you can have a list of those to look up. So one of those projects that I'll highlight is Richard Street project. So this is through downtown. It was an 8-block long rainwater tree trench. This is some pictures here of the construction. On this project, we actually had both types. We had the soil cells and the structural soil. So you can see the structural soil in the foreground there on the second picture, and then the soil cells a little further back. And then that trench was topped over with permeable pavers. And there's actually 3 ways that water can get into this trench. One, down through the permeable pavers. The tree pits also have curb cuts in them, so water can get in through these curb cuts and soak into the tree pit. And then, like I showed in that diagram, the catch basins also redirect water to a perforated distribution pipe along the length. Why we're excited about these and really like them is it's really a win-win-win, because foresters are happy about them because it gets more of the soil volume built in the city and gets water to the trees. It makes the urban designers happy because it's not taking up this valuable space on the surface in the right-of-way, and it makes the pavement asset managers happy because we're keeping the roots down deep where they can be happy and get the space, the air and water they need without popping up to the sidewalk, and creating trip hazards. So yeah, those are our tools now. So like launching this program and making the case. So the program, the Green Infrastructure Branch, was launched when I joined the city in 2017. And there's really, I think, 2 essential elements that we needed to start the branch and to really expand, our work and mission at the city. The first being is that regulatory stick. So, in the U.S., they have this Clean Water Act at this federal level, that's really driving green infrastructure implementation in cities in the U.S. So a lot of them are further behind, and that's largely due to that regulatory stick. In BC, we have the BC Liquid Waste Management Policy, and this requires municipalities to develop these plans, committing them to improving water quality. Vancouver's first iteration of this was the Integrated Rainwater Management Plan. And so then that's what triggered the launch of the Green Infrastructure Branch, with a few of us there. And our team, we built on that plan, put more detail to it to develop then the Rain City strategy. And as we better understand how implementation will work in the city, our modeling also of our system is improving. All of that information is feeding into yet another iteration of this, which will come out in the next year or two, called the Healthy Waters Plan. So right now we're looking at every 5 years or so as our understanding improves, that we're updating this plan. So the other element that has been this is really critical, is that backing and championing from leadership. Both mayor and council, but also from your city manager and directors at the city. And this is where I really need to commend my branch manager predecessor, Melina Schofield, because that was really her focus audience for the Rain City strategy. So it makes the case, beyond just the regulatory requirement, but why this is just good business for the city, and presents this beautiful vision for the future. So this really brought on board, council directors, city manager, and allowed us to really expand our implementation and get buy-in, and force all those other partners to work with us to get this work implemented. So, this is an award-winning document. I recommend checking it out on our website. Okay, so making the case. So now, we've got the leadership making the case for the drainage engineers. I worked in a half dozen cities. I get the same kind of concerns and comments about why it won't work here. From those engineers. Our soils are too tight. What about when we get that extreme events? We get the back-to-back storm events, or these systems, they're just going to clog and fail. One of the issues, in thinking about this is, I think there's just a discrepancy in how engineers are trained. Engineers are trained to design for the extreme events, and rightly so. We want our buildings and bridges to be built for that worst case scenario of high loading. We want our flood and conveyance systems to be designed for that extreme storm. But going back to that long list of goals at the beginning of the presentation, most of those are actually not how that particular asset is doing on its very worst day of the year, but it's how it's performing on average over the course of the year. What is your pollutant loading over the whole course of the year? So that's one of the points that I need to make those professionals is that it's not necessarily how that one asset is performing on its worst day of the year, but how it's performing on average. The other difference is the centralized versus decentralized mindset. For a centralized asset, you need to make sure that it's functioning in that worst case scenario. Failure can be catastrophic. But when you have a distributed system, decentralized, it's okay if one asset here, one asset there, is failing or underperformed, because there's going to be other assets in the network that are going to be overperforming. It's how the whole system is functioning on average. The other thing that we get is the whole thing of that, it works over there, but it doesn't work here. So we can show all the data and studies from other places around the country, but we still find that we have to do the monitoring locally to prove that this is going to work here. So we actually have quite a robust monitoring program at the city, and we publish monitoring reports biannually. We just published our second one, so both of those are will be up on our website. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So one of the trends that we find is a big difference between the design infiltration rates and what we actually find in reality when we monitor the systems post-construction. So those design rates, we're using the tests like double ring infiltrometer, well permeameter test. We get these infiltration rates that we design to. And then when we build the systems, we put in these monitoring wells. We have these cigar-shaped water level loggers that we can see what the drawdowns are for every single event. We see a big difference. I just have a few of the sites here, but we've monitored dozens of sites. I've included the one site where we have very similar between design and performance, and post-construction performance, but most of the time we see doubling of performance after post-construction. So curious, I talked to green infrastructure managers in other cities in the U.S. and Canada. They see very similar kind of results. I have some theories as to why. One of those kind of goes back to that designing for worst case scenario. So those design field infiltration tests. They're set up. The formulas are all set up um, to, to give you the hydraulic, the saturated hydraulic conductivity. Um, so this, when you do one of those tests, this is one of what the graph might look like. So you have very high infiltration at first, and then once the soils become saturated at a steady state, that's your design rate. One theory I have about what's happening is that actually a lot of our rain events is infiltrating during that early part of the curve when the soils actually aren't saturated. So again, going to average performance, actually we're infiltrating a lot more than what that maybe worst case saturated condition might tell you. So we're still considering how we might adapt our designs to like take this into consideration. Right now we're using a lot of the recommended factors of safety on those infiltration rates. That might be something that we might take away in the future. And then this still blows my mind, but we see improving performance with our bioretention systems over time. Infiltration increases with time. And this is very counterintuitive to engineers, people who work with filters, because the whole thing is that the performance is expected to decline over time until you have to replace it. But the big difference here is the living component of the system. The plants and microbiota, build that soil structure over time, maintain that infiltration capacity, can even improve it. And that sediment that comes off your streets or land use can and gets incorporated into that soil structure, built into that soil structure over time. But I mean, granted, there has to be a properly sized bioretention system. If you have an undersized system, it could still get overwhelmed with sediment and decline with time. Okay, so we've made the case for the drainage engineers. Now everybody else, and I mean everybody, because green infrastructure touches everything. We had to go and present a roadshow to every department and branch in the city. On the private side, they need to update their regulations and rainwater management requirements for the private sides. They are doing more green infrastructure on their side. We were reaching out to our O&M branches about how they're impacted, how they might have to change some of their standard operating procedures, or might even be involved in the future maintenance. And then also working out with our capital infrastructure design branches, because we have to work with them to make the space for green infrastructure, which really brings me to the next section, is making the space for it. Water, sewer, electrical, all of these things, they've been growing together for decades, standards developed over decades. Now here, green infrastructure, we're this new kid on the block and trying to elbow in our space in this limited right-of-way. There's some cases where the asset uses are very compatible and don't conflict, but others where they do conflict, and you have to develop new standards and offsets for how these things will work together. I'll give one case study here, working with water. So not all in cities, I think, have quite this restriction, but this is the most restrictive I think I've come across that we're dealing with, is this 3-meter offset requirement for green infrastructure from water mains. When you think 3 meters on either side of a water main, and water mains usually off to the side of the street, that's basically half the street, half of our right-of-ways that are off limits to green infrastructure. Now, granted, they'll allow green infrastructure to be in that space with like certain mitigation measures, but all of that is done on this case-by-case basis and can be quite costly. So this is something we've been working with our water design group and public health for over 5 years now on, and like digging into the history of this language here that I have at the bottom. It dates back to this Great Lakes 10 states and provinces plumbing standard in the 1970s, this language here. So different era, yeah. Thinking back to that chart I showed, Basically stormwater was a pipe, and water mains this pipe, so 3 meters from pipe to pipe, very straightforward. It's a regulation that makes sense. There wasn't necessarily a big scientific study that 3 meters is the ideal protective distance. I mean, the concern is about contamination to the water main. But the languages here, also include manholes, oil water separators, vertical seepage pits, is kind of roped in all types of stormwater management. But I think this is where it's frustrating for me, is that it's this mismatch from a different era. And I'll give you an extreme example of how we get into this big gray area with green infrastructure. Is we had a project that got put on hold because we had a absorbent landscape, basically like kind of deeper topsoil to take runoff from a sidewalk and bike path, not from a street, but bike path and sidewalk. Because this was labeled green infrastructure, it was considered stormwater management, and this 3 meters applied. So we ended up having to put in this expensive vertical impermeable liner. It also kind of limits to a degree the performance of the green infrastructure itself. So that's at the one extreme end, but like the factors get really complex when you look at a case-by-case basis. Maybe the 3 meters makes sense when you're doing a lot of stormwater infiltration in a concentrated spot. But what about if it's linear along the length of a road, like a roadside swale? Or you want to do a permeable pavement street, is that going to be off limits in this case? Even though that water is kind of distributed over the whole street and infiltrating, not in one spot, but it's over a water main. The different types of assets that it has. Some assets have more treatment performance than other assets. Is it partially infiltrating, fully infiltrating? And then on the water side, is it an old water main? What size is the water main? Is it a lateral or not? So just so many factors that can really slow down the implementation. Anyway, so this is one of the things that we're kind of chipping away at. And the point I want to make is, while this is a significant roadblock and something we're dealing with, we don't want it to hold up us issuing all of our standards and moving forward where we can. So we actually do have quite a few published standards and details and guidance on how to implement these assets. So that's up on our website, something you can also look up. Now for a more good news story. So making space. Good news stories with parks. Parks often gets defensive when they're approached by engineering, and it's understandably, because parks often gets perceived as this unbuilt space for infrastructure, like a new pump station. But with green infrastructure, we can take this different tact. Historically, parks end up being the leftover spaces in the city that are difficult to develop, like they have the wetland or the pond or the peatlands. So those areas become the parks, and they become these beloved features of the parks. What's ironic is that we end up starving those features then of water, because the surface runoff we're redirecting for our pipes and gutters, and then the subsurface hydrology we're also starving because of we have all this impervious area. So all these features end up drying up within parks. And it would shock you how many of these features in Vancouver get topped up with potable water. But we have this great opportunity with green infrastructure to reconnect these features to their watersheds. So we've got a whole long list of projects here, ongoing projects with parks right now. And one of these projects here that I'm featuring in this plan view is this Tatlow Creek stream daylighting. Sorry, not stream daylighting. This was an orphaned section of stream. Basically, it had just become now an aesthetic feature in the park, and in the summer they had potable water actually running through it, and it would just dump into the ocean. But we've reconnected it to the sewer, and we put in this big treatment manhole at the end of the sewer, so it's providing some treatment to that stormwater, and then it enters this and now reconnected section of stream. We've made some improvements and enlarged some culverts. So we're just finishing this off now. So the stream can actually potentially take returning salmon. So some recommendations on approaching parks with these projects. Certainly emphasizing that we don't want to take away any park uses. If anything, we want to try to emphasize opportunities here that we can enhance park features. Also highlight opportunities where we can fund park renewal. So we have this project where there's a need for a new synthetic turf field. It's also in a spot where we need to do a lot more stormwater storage. So engineering, we're coming to them with stormwater money to do the excavation, put in the base that'll have the stormwater storage, covering those costs, and then Parks just needs to cover the cost of the synthetic turf surfacing. So that's just one example that can advance some needed park renewal projects. The other is to come to them as an asset management partner, not to say, okay, we're going to help you build this into your park, and then it's all yours. You have to take care of it. But coming to the table with the maintenance funding to pay for the stormwater service that it's providing. And that might depend on the type of, on how your municipality is set up. Could be, okay, we're going to split up tasks. Parks, you're going to handle the aesthetic, and horticultural aspects of this project, and streets or stormwater crews will handle the sediment and structures. Or maybe Parks takes over the whole thing, but they have a charge code that charges to like a stormwater account. Okay, and then now to build the thing, it does require a different type of construction. The sequencing is different. It's things that contractors aren't used to, and if they're not familiar with it, they'll think, why this is crazy? Why the city's asking me to do this? I think it's really important up front for them to understand the purpose. And so we put a lot of energy into the kickoff meeting. We can give the whole roadshow or talk about the drivers. It helps to give the contractors some buy-in, and once they understand what we're trying to achieve, they actually come to the table with a lot of ideas themselves or better ways of doing things to get the construction properly, and build an infiltration spot in a built space. There's a lot of great resources out there. Credit Valley Conservation in Ontario has this low impact development construction guide that's recommended by the US EPA. There's also a certification program for contractors and inspectors called NGICP. A lot of jurisdictions actually use that certification as as a requirement in their bidding. The bidders need to have somebody on the team that has done that certification. San Francisco, they have a specific training program for their city that their contractors must take. In Vancouver, we haven't gone that route yet. One concern I have, or doubt I have, is that trained person actually going to be the one on site? Are they going to transfer that knowledge, to the people working on site, let alone their subcontractors? So where we really put our energy into is the inspections, and getting an inspector out there to the site frequently. So, that makes sure that the project is being built correctly. Hopefully we're building a relationship that's more like a partnership and helping to train the contractors through that, in the field, hands-on kind of way, which I think is maybe more effective than maybe some of these classroom certification programs. So that's our tactic at the city. And then another recommendation I have for construction is keeping those civil contracts separate from the planting contracts. So the civil works contractors, the people that are doing the excavation, laying the pipes, installing the concrete, once that work is done, they want to be off the site, done with the project, and they'll hire your cheapo subcontractor to put in the plants. And, no matter how much you pester them, you won't get those plants, replaced, the dead plants replaced until like the very end of the warranty. And really, that's not, in my mind, a completed green infrastructure project. A completed green infrastructure project that's ready for your standard maintenance is one that has established plans. So one thing that I found very successful is we keep that civil work separate. When they finish the project, they put in the bioretention soil, they put in some erosion control, and then our separate contract with the landscaper that we chose, and they have a clear understanding that establishment means like watering or replacing plants as needed. And then after the 2 or 3 years, it's a facility with mature plans. That's been very successful. Okay, and then finally, managing the assets. We're going to be installing a lot of these assets. We're in the hundreds now. To reach our goal in the next 50 years, we're going to be in the thousands. We want to manage 2,000 hectares of impervious area with this green infrastructure. When I show this to finance, their eyes pop. Like, how many assets are going to be adding to the city? And what is this liability going to be? How many assets are we going to have to replace in 30, 50, 100 years? But I think a very important point is to emphasize that it's not necessarily all additive. It's taking an existing asset and making it more multifunctional. So I talked about that with the landscape assets, with permeable pavement. It's that paved laneway, and we want to make it a permeable pavement laneway. That pipe that's connecting that catch basin to the sewer. We want to make that into an infiltration trench. So it's not a new pipe, but it's a perforated pipe that's draining into this gravel trench bedding. I think another thing we have to get used to, building these asset management programs is the complexity of the green infrastructure asset life cycles and the uncertainty. We've been starting to implement these over the last 30 years, but we don't have a whole lot of history on exactly what does the life cycle look like. And we're also seeing this can be very complex and situational, how long an asset might last until it needs to be fully renewed. And the life cycle isn't always as straightforward as build it, maintain it, and then replace it. We're finding that there's a lot of these internal loops as well, where you can do some cost-effective rehab to bring the asset back to functionality. So, for bioretention, it might be just replacing the first few inches of soil and replacing the plants. For permeable pavement, we have this example here. The Olympic Village was built with these permeable pavers over 15 years ago. There was no green infrastructure branch for all that time. It wasn't getting maintained. No vacuum sweeping. So it was clogging over time. Our branch comes along. We do these infiltration testing. Very low, very highly clogged pavements. We go and do some power washing and replacement of some of the filler material between the pavers. We're able to bring the infiltration right back up to where it was at installation. So even if you have budget cuts and some of these systems can't be maintained, they're not completely foregone. You can bring a lot of them still back to functionality. Building an operation and maintenance program doesn't have to be scary. You start small. We still have a relatively small group of assets that can be done with just a handful of contracts with contractors. We've got our system set up with these 3 different programs. The Green Infrastructure Rehab Program, so taking all those legacy assets, doing some of those rehab actions to bring them up to our functionality standard. Then we have a maintenance program specifically for the vegetated assets. It takes a very particular skill set and equipment, and then a separate one for our non-vegetated assets that takes a different set of skills and equipment. And lastly, stewardship programs. This City of Vancouver has a very robust Green Streets adoption program. as we were looking into this and how to best use stewardship, we again engaged UVC in a research to explore these alternative models for maintaining green infrastructure. That was by Alicia Kingdon. Um, really great report. Lots of very helpful case studies and conclusions. I think one of the ones that we're following is that it's not stewardship programs aren't a replacement for maintenance. It's not like, oh, those are adopted and we don't have to go look at those anymore, but it's for doing all of the work in between site visits. So maybe our contractor gets out to a site 2 or 3 times a year, maintains an asset to, let's say, grade B level. It's our volunteers and stewardship that can really take the assets to the grade A level. Okay, I ran through quite a bit of territory there. I just grabbed some highlights here. So these GI tools, they've been around for 30 years. There's lots of research proving their performance. Really, we're just improving around the edges. Making the case, those leadership champions are really important. And bring that roadshow to your implementation partners. And actually, we've had a lot of turnover since we did those first roadshows, and I'm kind of gearing up to actually bring these roadshows back to those departments. Making the space, move the standards forward where you can while chipping away at those roadblocks. Constructions, use inspectors to educate your contractors, keep those civil and planting contracts separate, and then with managing the assets. GI assets aren't always additive. They're often, replacing existing assets or making those assets more multifunctional. And be prepared. The life cycle of GI assets is complex. And here's that slide with some of those references. I mentioned a lot of it's on our website. I didn't bother putting web addresses. I think it's probably easier if you just type those titles in a search engine and those will come up.